I recently spoke with a retiree who had $2,700,000 in his portfolio, a fully paid off home in Oakville, and a bucket list of 12 countries he still wanted to see. He told me he had never felt more depressed in his life. Most Canadians between 55 and 65 are sprinting toward a finish line measured in dollars. Maybe it is $1 million. Maybe it is $2 million. The belief is simple. Once the paycheck stops and the suitcase comes out, the happiness starts. Here is the math that does not add up. Even 2 generous bucket list trips a year add up to about 30 days away. That leaves 335 ordinary days where you are not standing under the Eiffel Tower or lying on a beach in Maui. If your retirement plan is 90% financial and 10% bucket list, you are ignoring what I call the identity trap, and it is a big part of why roughly 1 in 3 retirees go through a real psychological drop in their first 24 months out of work. This is not a knock against the man with the $2,700,000 portfolio. He did everything the financial industry told him to do. He maxed out his RRSP for 30 years and paid off his mortgage early, and he still hit his number ahead of schedule. The part nobody warned him about was the 335 days that were never on anyone's checklist. I have sat across from people who had every box checked on paper and still felt lost by month 6. In this video, I want to show you why a $2 million portfolio can still leave you miserable, and I am going to walk you through an exercise I call the Perfect Tuesday, so you do not become the person who has everything on paper and nothing to wake up for. We are going to close the 364-day gap before you hand in your notice. There is a concept economists call the marginal utility of wealth, and in retirement it shows up fast. For a Canadian couple, once your basic needs and a comfortable buffer are covered, usually somewhere around $85,000 to $100,000 a year in after-tax income, the link between more money and more happiness flattens out. Past that point, an extra $10,000 sitting in your account does very little for how you feel on a Tuesday afternoon. Why does this happen? Spend 35 or 40 years being a lawyer, a manager, or an engineer, and your brain gets used to a certain kind of reward. Deadlines met, problems solved, recognition from people who need something from you. This is not laziness or ingratitude. It is simply what 4 decades of routine does to a nervous system that has been rewarded for showing up and performing. I call this the identity protection line. When you retire, the deposits keep landing, CPP 1 week, RRIF withdrawals another, but the recognition that used to come with the paycheck disappears almost overnight. Let me walk you through the mini math on this, because it matters. A $2,700,000 portfolio, drawn down at a conservative 4% rule, gives you about $108,000 a year. Take off taxes and basic living costs in a city like Toronto or Vancouver, call it $70,000, and you are left with roughly $38,000 in what I would call fun money. Spend that $38,000 on things and one-off trips, and you get a short spike in mood, not a floor under your day-to-day life. Statistics Canada has tracked what happens to social connection after people leave the workforce, and the pattern is consistent. People lose a meaningful slice of their daily social contact in the first year of retirement, and that loss lands hardest on people whose identity was built almost entirely around their job title. That matters for you specifically because a shrinking social circle is one of the clearest signs behind the psychological drop so many retirees report inside their first 2 years. That is the trade nobody puts in the financial plan. You can build a bulletproof withdrawal strategy and still lose the thing that got you out of bed at 7 in the morning. That is not a flaw in the plan. It is simply a piece of the plan nobody wrote down. Your money might last 30 years. Your sense of purpose, if you have not built anything outside of work, can expire on day 1 of retirement. So how do you know if you are at risk? Start with a simple test. Picture a random Tuesday in November, 3 years from now, at 10 in the morning. What are you doing? Here is the exercise I ask people to do before they hand in their resignation letter. Grab a piece of paper and split it into 3 columns. It takes about 5 minutes, and it tends to be more revealing than any retirement calculator you have ever used. In the first column, write down your actual Tuesday right now, from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. For most people, that column fills up fast with work, commute, and email. In the second column, write your bucket list Tuesday. Waking up in Tuscany, coffee on a terrace, no alarm clock. That column is easy too. It is the one everyone already imagines. The third column is the one that matters, and almost nobody fills it in before they retire. Write down your ordinary Tuesday 3 years into retirement. You are not in Tuscany. You are home. What are you doing at 10 in the morning? Who are you talking to? Maybe you are doing the crossword. Maybe you are waiting for a phone call that used to come from the office and does not come anymore. If the honest answer is you are not sure, that blank space is the gap this whole video is built around. This is not a trick question. Some people write "I don't know" for that third column, and that is actually useful information. If work filled 10 hours of your day with structure, deadlines, and people who needed you, retiring without replacing any of that is like pulling out a support beam and hoping the rest of the house holds up on its own. I used to tell clients that the goal was to reach the number. I was wrong. I have sat across from too many people who hit the number and then called me 6 months later asking if they should go back to work part-time, not for the money, but to have someone to talk to on a Tuesday. Retirement hands you something most people never budget for, and that is time. On average, it adds about 2,500 hours of free time a year compared to a full-time working life. Spread across a year, that is close to 7 extra hours a day with no meetings, no commute, and no built-in reason to leave the house. A daily walk, a standing coffee with an old colleague, a woodworking bench in the garage. These are the kind of micro-rituals that soak up that time before it turns into a vacuum. Without them, those 2,500 hours do not feel like freedom. They feel empty, and anxiety is very good at filling empty space. Some of that free time will naturally go toward chores, appointments, or helping with grandkids, and that is fine. The risk shows up when none of it has been claimed on purpose. This is not about becoming a different person. It is about building the ordinary Tuesday before you need it, not after the silence sets in. If you are the kind of high achiever who worries that doing nothing will actually drive you a little crazy, you are not wrong to worry, and you are not alone in it. Stick around, because the rest of this video is about building a version of retirement that is as productive as your career, just on your own terms. There is a stretch of time I call the retirement red zone, the 5 years before you stop working and the 5 years after. Historically, this is when the biggest shifts in health and daily habits happen, for better or worse. Here is the number that should reframe how you think about this stretch. Statistics Canada research puts disability-free life expectancy at around age 73 for the average Canadian, while overall life expectancy runs into the early 80s. That is not a small technicality. It means the years when you can genuinely enjoy an active retirement, hiking, traveling without pain, keeping up with grandchildren on the floor, are shorter than most retirement brochures assume. That gap adds up to a genuinely active window of roughly a decade. Picture the difference between hiking a favorite trail at 68 versus doing the same trail at 78 with a knee that needs attention before every outing. Same trail, a completely different experience, and the calendar decides which version you get more than your bank balance does. If you spend the first few years of that decade recovering from burnout, or bored because you retired without an identity beyond your job, you are burning through your most limited asset, not your money, your healthy years. Recovering from burnout looks different for everyone. For some, it is 18 months of low-grade exhaustion before they even start thinking about hobbies again. For others, it is a slow slide into daytime television because nothing else has replaced the structure a job used to provide. Nobody sends a reminder halfway through that decade telling you time is running short. The only signal tends to be a hip that did not used to complain, or a friend your age who is suddenly not up for the trip anymore. This is why, in your early 60s, pouring more effort into saving an extra $20,000 is often a worse trade than putting that same energy into the health habits that stretch out your active years. A body that can still hike, still travel without pain, still get down on the floor with grandchildren, is worth more than another line on a bank statement you may never fully use. Nobody hands you a countdown clock for this, which is exactly the problem. The math on your RRSP is easy to check anytime you want. The math on your health span only shows up in hindsight, and by then you cannot get the years back. Meet Robert. He is 62, a senior manager, and he retires with $1,500,000 in his RRSP. He picks a date, sends his goodbye email, and expects the good life to start the following Monday. For the first 3 months, Robert golfs. He likes it at first. By month 6, the golf is background noise, something to fill the mornings rather than something to look forward to. He starts checking his RBC direct investing account 4 times a day, watching market swings he used to ignore completely. He feels strangely irrelevant because nobody is emailing him for a decision anymore, and the only real movement in his week comes from the golf cart. His wife notices it too. He is irritable by lunchtime for no reason she can point to, and dinner conversation drifts toward what the market did that day instead of anything that happened in the neighborhood. I have watched this exact pattern play out more than once, with people who spent 30 years managing teams and then spent their first year of retirement managing nothing but a scorecard. Now picture the same $1,500,000, the same age, a different approach. Robert moves to 3 days a week of consulting instead of quitting outright. He joins a woodworking club on his days off and starts mentoring a couple of younger people in his old industry. On the money side, he defers CPP from 65 to 70 instead of taking it early. Take the 2026 maximum CPP payment at 65, $1,507.65 a month. Wait until 70, and that same entitlement grows by 42% to roughly $2,140 a month, guaranteed for life and untouched by market swings. That higher floor later is what lets him spend more comfortably on his Tuesday rituals now, without the low-grade fear of draining an account he cannot rebuild. The consulting income is not really what changes his Tuesdays. It is modest, maybe $15,000 a year, enough to keep his name in a few emails without controlling his calendar. What changes his Tuesdays is that Wednesday and Thursday now belong to the woodworking club and to a couple of younger analysts who call him for advice instead of a boss who needed a report by 5 o'clock. By the second year, Robert cannot always tell you what the market did on a given Tuesday. He can tell you what he built that week. Same portfolio, same age, likely the same postal code. One version of Robert feels irrelevant by month 6. The other feels busier in a good way and more financially secure 10 years out. The difference was never really about the size of the RRSP. It was about what he actually built around it. Once you can see the gap between your bucket list Tuesday and your real one, you need a way to close it before day 1 of retirement, not after. Step 1 is what I call the 3-role rule. Walk into retirement with at least 3 identities that have nothing to do with your job title. Grandparent counts. Community volunteer counts. Intermediate pickleball player, believe it or not, counts. A part-time volunteer shift at a local hospital or food bank counts just as much as a hobby with a price tag attached. The point is that your sense of self is not resting on a single leg that disappears the day you clean out your desk. Step 2 is locking in one health habit that gets you out of the house and doing it before you retire, not after. A standing walk with a neighbor, a Tuesday morning swim, a weekly hike. It needs a time and a place attached to it, because vague intentions to stay active tend to quietly disappear once the structure of a job is gone. Step 3 is matching your withdrawals to your actual Tuesday list, not just pulling money out because the calendar says so. Say your perfect Tuesday costs $50, coffee with a friend, a gym drop-in fee, a bit of hobby supplies. That is $18,250 a year for a habit that keeps you connected and moving. CPP averages around $925 a month, and OAS for the July to September quarter of 2026 runs about $742.31 a month for ages 65 to 74. Between those two payments alone, most people can cover a base Tuesday budget like that without touching their RRIF withdrawals at all. Once your base Tuesday is funded by guaranteed income, your savings become the layer for bigger things, without the guilt of feeling like you are eating into a nest egg every time you buy a coffee. But that guilt is real for a lot of people, and it deserves its own conversation, because it is often the actual reason people underspend a retirement they worked decades to afford. None of this requires a spreadsheet more complicated than the one you already used to plan a vacation. It just requires pointing the same discipline at an ordinary Tuesday instead of only pointing it at a trip to Portugal. After 30 or 40 years of watching your RRSP grow, watching it shrink can feel like losing, even when the plan says you are exactly on track. This has a name. Behavioral economists call it loss aversion, and it is one of the most consistent patterns in personal finance. Your brain weighs a loss more heavily than an equivalent gain, so pulling $2,000 out of your account for a trip can feel worse than that same. $2,000 felt good going in 5 years earlier. If you feel a flash of guilt reaching for your own savings, that is completely normal, and it does not mean you are doing anything wrong. You spent 30 plus years being trained to be a saver. Now the plan is asking you to become a spender, almost overnight, and no one warned you how uncomfortable that switch would feel. This shows up in strange, specific ways. Someone will comparison shop 3 grocery stores to save $6 on a Tuesday, then feel a genuine stab of anxiety about paying for a weekend trip to see a grandchild, even though that trip costs less than a single month of their guaranteed CPP and OAS income combined. The math says one thing, the old saver instinct says another, and the old instinct usually wins. Here is a small reframe that helps. Stop calling it spending your savings. Start calling it collecting your paycheck. Your portfolio is not a monument you are protecting. It is your employer now, and its only job is to fund your perfect Tuesday. The same person who will not blink at the hydro bill or the property tax bill every single month will sometimes agonize over pulling $40 out of savings for a haircut or a round of golf. If your portfolio is overperforming and you are still not spending it, your employer is failing you. Retirement is not a 30-year vacation. It is closer to a 10,000-day lifestyle design project, and the bucket list only covers a few dozen of those days. Forget the bucket list for a moment, not because trips do not matter, but because they were never going to be the thing that carries you through a decade of ordinary Tuesdays. Focus on the other 364 days instead. You have the money, whether that is $600,000 or $2 million, or you are close enough that the details are workable. You have already done the hard part. What is left is giving yourself permission to build an identity that does not need a business card attached to it, and a Tuesday that does not need Tuscany to feel like it was worth waking up for. The bucket list can still happen. It was just never supposed to be the whole plan. The other 364 days were always the real plan. If you want to see how timing your CPP and OAS properly can help fund exactly this kind of Tuesday, that is worth exploring next. And if this way of thinking about retirement makes sense to you, stick around, because there is more where this came from.